Ever drawn a blank trying to remember all the U.S. presidents beyond, like, Lincoln, maybe the guys on Mount Rushmore? That
Yeah.
gets a little fuzzy for everyone, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like trying to remember your third grade classmates. Some stand out, but the rest are a blur. But luckily for today's deep dive, you've got us as your presidential memory guides.
Exactly. We're going full schoolhouse rock, but way more intrigue. We're talking every single U.S. president in order, their party, and maybe some, like, head-scratching moments along the way.
Think of it as your cheat sheet to win any presidential trivia night, maybe impress your friends with some historical hot takes.
Right. Okay, so no time travel needed. We're starting at the very beginning. Our main man, George Washington.
Of course.
President number one, serving 1789 to 1797. First president, big legacy. And he wasn't rocking a party label at all,
It's easy to forget in our hyper-partisan world. Washington, he was all about that unity. He actually feared political parties would tear the nation apart.
which, knowing how things turned out, kind of ironic.
Will bit, yeah.
All right, next up, we've got John Adams, a Federalist, our second president, 1797 to 1801. Now, didn't the Federalists believe in a strong national government?
They did. Think Alexander Hamilton, bit of a rock star back then, advocating for a national bank and policies to boost commerce and industry.
Okay, got it. Strong central government, big on business. Then comes Thomas Jefferson, our third president, 1801 to 1809, and a complete 180 in terms of political ideology. He was all about that small government life.
Oh, yeah, 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 Ashley. Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, championed states' rights, limited federal power, and a more agrarian vision for America. Quite the contrast to the Federalists.
Yeah, a real political tug-of-war. It's fascinating to see how these early parties really shaped the nation's direction.
Yeah.
Okay, keeping this party train rolling, we've got another Democratic Republican, James Madison, from 1809 to 1817. You know him, you love him, the father of the Constitution.
Author of the Bill of Rights, too. Madison, he really left his mark. Following him, we have another Democratic Republican, James Monroe, serving from 1817 to 1825, a period often called the era of good feelings.
Good feelings. In politics, was everyone just getting along for once?
Relatively speaking, there was less partisan fighting, more national unity, a fascinating anomaly in our often contentious political history.
Makes you wonder what they knew that we don't.
Right.
All right. Sixth on our presidential lineup is John Quincy Adams, son of our second president, John Adams. He served from 1825 to 1829, starting as a Democratic Republican, but later identifying as a national Republican. Talk about a political,
Makeover.
yeah,
A glow up.
and talk about how much the political landscape can shift. The National Republican Party eventually morphed into the Whig Party, which directly opposed Andrew Jackson, our next president.
Speaking of Old Hickory himself, Andrew Jackson, a Democrat, served from 1829 to 1837. He's known for expanding presidential power and for some pretty controversial policies, especially towards Native Americans.
A true populist and a polarizing figure, that's for sure. His presidency really impacted how American democracy evolved.
And it wasn't always pretty, was it?
Up next, we've got our eighth president, Martin Van Buren, another Democrat, who served from 1837 to 1841. He was a close ally of Jackson, right? Like carrying on that Jacksonian democracy torch.
Absolutely. Though he got dealt a rough hand with the Panic of 1837, a massive economic crisis that tarnished his presidency despite continuing many of Jackson's policies.
Talk about bad timing.
Yeah.
And speaking of bad timing, our ninth president, William Henry Harrison, a Whig, takes the cake for the shortest term. A mere 31 days in 1841.
A stark reminder that even in the highest office, life can be fleeting.
No kidding. And that, of course, meant his vice president had to step up, which brings us to John Tyler, president number 10, serving from 1841 to 1845. He started as a Whig, and then things got interesting.
Interesting is one way to put it. Tyler clashed with his own party so badly, especially over that national bank issue, that he was actually expelled from the Whigs.
Expelled. That's got to stink. So what happened? Did he just become like an independent?
He did. John Tyler became the first president to be expelled by his own party. Goes down in history as unaffiliated.
Wow, talk about a political plot twist. Okay, so after that drama, we've got James K. Polk, a Democrat, taking office from 1845 to 1849. He was all about expanding U.S. territory, right? Manifest Destiny and all that.
That's the one. Polk's presidency was practically a masterclass in land acquisition. Texas, the Oregon Territory, and then the Mexican-American War, which added California and a huge chunk of the Southwest to the U.S. map.
He really put the manifest in Manifest Destiny. But after all that expansion, tragedy struck again. Zachary Taylor, another Whig president, takes office in 1849, only to pass away just over a year later in 1850.
It's a sobering reminder of how fragile life can be, even for those at the pinnacle of power. And once again, the mantle unexpectedly falls to the vice president. Millard Fillmore, also a Whig, finishing out Taylor's term from 1850 to 1853.
He's one of those presidents who gets a bit lost in the shuffle, isn't he?
He often gets overshadowed, but don't let that fool you. Fillmore tackled some major issues, like the Compromise of 1850, which attempted to address the ever-present elephant in the room, slavery, in the newly acquired territories.
Trying to keep the peace in a deeply divided nation? Not an easy job. After Fillmore, we've got Franklin Pierce, a Democrat, serving from 1853 to 1857. And if I remember correctly, he doesn't exactly top the presidential popularity polls.
Not quite. Pierce has supported the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which essentially threw gasoline on the already smoldering fire of the slavery debate, earned him a lot of criticism. It's widely seen as a major factor contributing to the outbreak of the Civil War.
So, not exactly a legacy-building presidency. Then comes James Buchanan, another Democrat, who served from 1857 to 1861, and he doesn't fare much better in the history books, does he?
Buchanan's often criticized for what some see as inaction in the face of the secession crisis. He believed that he didn't have the constitutional power to prevent states from leaving, a miscalculation with devastating consequences.
Talk about a pivotal moment in American history. And then, of course, comes the one, the only, Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president. A Republican serving from 1861 to 1865, he guided the nation through the tumultuous Civil War, delivered the Emancipation Proclamation, and left an indelible mark on America's soul.
Lincoln's legacy is incredibly complex. A symbol of unity, a champion of human rights, but also a leader who grappled with the brutal realities of war. His assassination, just as the nation began to heal from the Civil War, is a tragedy for the ages.
And tragically, it falls to his vice president, Andrew Johnson, a Democrat, to pick up the pieces. Johnson served from 1865 to 1869, facing the daunting task of Reconstruction.
Talk about a tough act to follow. Johnson butted heads with Congress constantly over how to reintegrate the former Confederate states and protect the rights of newly freed slaves. He even narrowly escaped removal from office through impeachment.
Political drama at its finest. And then comes a leader who needs no introduction, Ulysses S. Grant, our Civil War hero, a Republican taking office from 1869 to 1877.
From battlefield to the White House. Quite the career change. Grant's presidency wasn't without its share of scandals, but he made significant strides in enforcing civil rights during Reconstruction.
Progress isn't always linear, is it?
Nope.
Okay. Following Grant, we have Rutherford B. Hayes, another Republican, from 1877 to 1881. Now, didn't his election involve some serious controversy?
Oh, absolutely. Hayes's election was one for the history books. It ended in a compromise that essentially traded the withdrawal of federal troops from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction, for the presidency. A turning point in the nation's racial politics, for sure.
Compromise.
Yeah.
The art of politics, right? Sadly, our next president, James Garfield, also a Republican, had his term cut tragically short. He was assassinated in 1881, just a few months into his presidency.
Shot by a disgruntled office seeker, no less. It's a chilling reminder of the dark side of political ambition and the ever-present threat of violence that has haunted American politics.
It's a sobering thought. So, after Garfield's assassination, yet another vice president steps up. Chester A. Arthur, a Republican, completing the term from 1881 to 1885. Wasn't he a bit of a surprise as president?
Arthur surprised a lot of people. Despite being associated with the spoils system, he actually turned out to be quite the reformer, signing the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, which aimed to professionalize the federal bureaucracy and curb patronage.
The reformer we didn't know we needed. Now, buckle up for this one. Grover Cleveland, a Democrat, is up next. He's the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, making him both our 22nd and 24th president.
Talk about a political comeback.
Right.
He served first from 1885 to 1889, took a break, and then came back for round 2 from 1893 to 1897. That speaks volumes about his political acumen and staying power.
He must have been doing something right. Okay, sandwiched between Cleveland's terms, we've got Benjamin Harrison, a Republican, serving from 1889 to 1893. His presidency is often linked with the economic issues, right?
Exactly. Harrison grappled with the passage of the McKinley Tariff, which raised protective tariffs on imported goods, and the Sherman Antitrust Act, a landmark law designed to prevent monopolies. His presidency was a roller coaster of economic policy.
A lot to handle. And then it's back to Mr. Grover Cleveland for his second act. Now, after Cleveland's double feature, we have William McKinley, a Republican, taking the stage from 1897 to 1901.
McKinley's time in office coincided with a period of significant economic growth and industrial expansion. Plus, he led the U.S. to victory in the Spanish-American War, which really expanded American influence globally.
From domestic growth to global power, McKinley saw it all. But sadly, his presidency also met a tragic end.
Indeed. Like a few others on our list, McKinley was assassinated while in office, a stark reminder of the fragility of power.
It's a heavy reminder that the office of the presidency can be as dangerous as it is powerful. Speaking of powerful, up next is one of the most dynamic figures in American history, Theodore Roosevelt, a Republican known for his larger-than-life personality.
Teddy, as he was affectionately called, was a force of nature. He bursts onto the scene in 1901, serving until 1909, and his impact is still felt today.
Champion of conservation, trustbuster extraordinaire, and let's not forget that whole speak softly and carry a big stick energy. Teddy was in a league of his own.
Absolutely. He was a true original. And the legacy continues with our next president, William Howard Taft, a Republican serving from 1909 to 1913. He's the only person to have been both President of the United States and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Talk about a distinguished resume. From the Oval Office to the highest court in the land. That's impressive. But following Teddy Roosevelt must have been quite the challenge.
It certainly wasn't easy. Taft was a very capable administrator, but his presidency often gets judged against the sheer force of personality that was his predecessor.
A tough act to follow, for sure. And then, as if on cue, the world throws a curveball. Enter Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, serving 2 terms, from 1913 to 1921. His presidency was dominated by the outbreak of World War I and his ambitious push for the League of Nations.
Wilson was a complex figure, idealistic, intellectual, deeply committed to his vision of a lasting peace. He led the U.S. into the Great War and played a key role in shaping the Treaty of Versailles. But his dream of the League of Nations ultimately failed to gain traction in the U.S. Senate.
A sobering reminder that even the best intentions don't always guarantee success on the world stage. Okay, we're getting closer to modern times. Next up is Warren G. Harding, a Republican who served from 1921 to 1923.
Harding's presidency, while marked by scandal, also reflected a longing for normalcy after the upheaval of World War I. His call for a return to normalcy resonated with a nation weary of war and eager for stability.
Sometimes you just need a breather.
Right.
But tragically, like a few others on our presidential journey, Harding died in office. And so we bid farewell to the Roaring Twenties with Calvin Coolidge, another Republican, who served from 1923 to 1929.
Silent Cal, as he was known, was all about that pro-business, hands-off approach to government. His presidency coincided with a period of unprecedented economic prosperity and cultural change.
The calm before the storm, sadly, because following Coolidge, we have Herbert Hoover, a Republican, taking office in 1929, just in time for the Great Depression. Talk about bad timing, part 2.
Hoover, a brilliant engineer and successful businessman, found himself facing the biggest economic crisis in American history. Despite his best efforts, his policies were seen as inadequate in the face of such widespread suffering, leading to his defeat in the 1932 election.
And paving the way for one of the most transformative presidents in U.S. history, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, better known as FDR.
A true titan of the 20th century.
Absolutely. A Democrat, FDR served an unprecedented 4 terms from 1933 until his death in 1945. His New Deal programs fundamentally reshaped the role of the federal government, and his leadership during World War II cemented his place as a giant of the presidency.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to overstate FDR's impact, you know? He tackled the Great Depression, led the nation to victory in World War II, and forever changed the relationship between the American people and their government.
And then with the weight of the world, literally, on his shoulders, Harry S. Truman, another Democrat, takes over as president following FDR's death in 1945.
Yeah.
Talk about stepping into some big shoes.
Oh, man. No pressure, right. Truman, who had been vice president for, only 82 days before assuming the presidency, faced a world in transition. The end of World War II, the dawn of the atomic age, and the escalating tensions of the Cold War.
Talk about a baptism by fire. Truman made some of the most consequential decisions in human history, right? Authorizing the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, containing Soviet expansionism, desegregating the U.S. armed forces.
Decisions that continue to be debated to this day.
For sure.
And as if that weren't enough, he also led the U.S. into the Korean War.
Truman definitely earned his place on that list of presidents who faced unimaginable challenges. And speaking of navigating a complex world, that's a perfect segue to our next president, Dwight D. Eisenhower, a Republican, better known as Ike.
A true American icon.
He served 2 terms, from 53 to 61, bringing a sense of, stability and calm after the tumult of the Truman years. What stands out most to you about Eisenhower's presidency?
For me, it's his ability to project strength and resolve while also promoting peace and diplomacy. He understood the complexities of the Cold War and the, ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation.
And let's not forget his warning about the military-industrial complex. Talk about prescient.
Absolutely. He understood that delicate balance of power and the need for, thoughtful leadership in a world on the brink.
Words to live by. And speaking of words to live by, our next president is known for his eloquence and charisma, John F. Kennedy, a Democrat who captivated the nation with his youthful energy and inspiring vision.
Yeah, JFK's presidency, though tragically cut short by his assassination in 1963, continues to, inspire and intrigue. He challenged us to reach for the moon, stared down the Soviets during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and embodied a spirit of hope and progress.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Chills. Every time. His assassination sent shockwaves through the nation and left a void that seemed impossible to fill.
And once again, it falls to the Vice President, Lyndon B. Johnson, also a Democrat, to guide the nation through grief and uncertainty. LBJ served out the remainder of Kennedy's term and then won re-election in 1964.
LBJ had a knack for getting things done. He used his, considerable political skills to push through landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, monumental achievements in the fight for racial equality.
Absolutely. His domestic agenda was incredibly ambitious and consequential, but his presidency, like so many others, was overshadowed by America's involvement in Vietnam.
A conflict that divided the nation and cast a long shadow over LBJ's legacy. And then in 1969, we entered the era of Richard Nixon, a Republican who promised to bring peace with honor in Vietnam.
Nixon's a perfect example of how history rarely offers, easy answers or simple judgments. He ended U.S. involvement in Vietnam, opened relations with China, and engaged in arms control talks with the Soviet Union.
Major accomplishments on the world stage.
But his legacy is forever tarnished by the Watergate scandal, a stark reminder that even the most powerful leader is not above the law.
And speaking of Watergate, that brings us to one of the most tumultuous periods in American political history. Buckle up, because things are about to get really interesting. So, Nixon resigns in the wake of Watergate, throwing the country into uncharted territory. And is his vice president, Gerald Ford, a Republican, who steps in to try and right the ship.
Imagine being handed the reins of a nation reeling from scandal and disillusionment. That was Ford's reality in 1974. He faced the, unenviable task of restoring faith in government after the Watergate debacle.
Talk about a tall order. Didn't he also make a pretty controversial decision right off the bat?
He did. Ford pardoned Nixon, which outraged many Americans who wanted to see the former president held accountable for his actions. But Ford believed that it was the best way to move the nation forward, from the shadow of Watergate.
A true test of leadership, making tough calls when there's no easy answer. Okay, so Ford serves out Nixon's term, and then in 1977, we usher in a new era with Jimmy Carter, a Democrat, as our 39th president.
Carter campaigned on a promise of honesty and integrity, like a breath of fresh air after the Watergate years. He really emphasized human rights in his foreign policy, brokered the Camp David Accords, which were a historic step towards peace in the Middle East, and even created the Department of Energy.
And let's not forget that Carter has remained incredibly active in humanitarian work since leaving office, a true testament to his character.
Absolutely. He's a model for public service beyond the presidency. But even with those accomplishments, Carter faced an uphill battle. A struggling economy, the Iran hostage crisis, a sense that America's global standing was slipping.
And that paves the way for a dramatic shift in American politics with the election of Ronald Reagan, a Republican, in 1981. Morning in America. Remember that slogan?
Oh, yeah. Reagan was a master communicator who connected with Americans on a visceral level. He promised a return to American strength and prosperity, and his 2 terms in office, from 1981 to 1989, ushered in an era of conservative politics that continues to shape the political landscape today.
Reagan's known for his tax cuts, his military buildup, and his, unwavering stance against the Soviet Union. Many credit him with helping to bring about the end of the Cold War.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Yeah.
It's one of the most iconic lines of the 20th century. Reagan's brand of, optimistic conservatism and his willingness to stand up to America's adversaries resonated powerfully both at home and abroad.
And after Reagan's 2 terms, His vice president, George H.W. Bush, another Republican, takes over as our 41st president, serving from 1989 to 1993.
Talk about a president who had to navigate a world in flux. Bush's presidency saw the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the reunification of Germany, a truly historic period.
Not to mention the First Gulf War. Bush assembled an international coalition to liberate Kuwait after Saddam Hussein's invasion, a decisive military victory.
But despite his foreign policy successes, Bush struggled to connect with voters on domestic issues. And in 1992, he lost his re-election bid to a young, charismatic governor from Arkansas.
Bill Clinton, a Democrat. Clinton promised to focus on the economy and usher in an era of hope and opportunity. His 2 terms in office from 93 to 2001 were marked by economic prosperity and, relative peace, but also by scandal and partisan warfare.
It was the decade of the dot-com boom, globalization, and the rise of the 24-hour news cycle. Clinton signed NAFTA into law, expanded NATO, and appointed more women and minorities to his cabinet than any previous president.
But he also faced impeachment proceedings stemming from the Monica Lewinsky scandal. A reminder that even in the midst of peace and prosperity, scandal and division are never far away.
And boy, did things take a turn after Clinton. Because in 2001, America elected George W. Bush, son of our 41st president. This Bush, also a Republican, campaigned on a platform of compassionate conservatism, but his presidency was forever altered by the events of September 11, 2001.
The 9/11 attacks fundamentally changed the world and Bush's presidency. He launched the war on terror, invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, and dramatically expanded domestic surveillance programs.
Bush's presidency is still hotly debated. His supporters credit him with keeping America safe during a time of great peril, while his detractors argue that his actions led to endless wars and undermined civil liberties.
His legacy fraught with complexity, that's for sure. And after 8 years of Bush, America was ready for a change.
And change did come. In 2009, Barack Obama made history as our first African-American president, a Democrat.
Yeah.
Obama inherited 2 wars and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression.
Talk about a daunting inbox. But Obama projected an aura of calm and competence, assuring the nation that, yes, we can overcome these challenges.
And he did. Well, he tried to, at least.
He signed the Affordable Care Act into law, oversaw the end of the Iraq War, and ordered the raid that killed Osama bin Laden.
Obama's presidency was a watershed moment, a testament to how far we had come as a nation and a beacon of hope for the future.
But after 8 years of Obama, America seemed to crave something different, something unpredictable.
Enter Donald Trump, a Republican, real estate mogul, and reality TV star who upended all the rules of American politics.
Trump's 2016 victory shocked the world. His presidency from 2017 to 2021 was marked by constant chaos and controversy.
He withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord, launched a trade war with China, and appointed 3 conservative justices to the Supreme Court, shifting the balance of the court for generations to come.
Love him or hate him, there's no denying that Trump was one of the most consequential presidents in modern history, and his presidency exposed deep divisions within American society that continue to shape our political landscape.
Absolutely. Trump's presidency was like holding up a mirror to America. It revealed our strengths and our flaws, our hopes and our fears, and it left us grappling with some very difficult questions about who we are and where we're headed as a nation.
And that brings us to the present day. Joe Biden, a Democrat, became our 46th president in 2021. He promised to restore normalcy and decency after the tumultuous Trump years.
Biden, the oldest person ever to assume the presidency, faces a nation grappling with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, economic uncertainty, political polarization, and the looming threat of climate change.
Talk about a full plate. So there you have it, a whirlwind tour through the history of the U.S. presidency. It's a story of triumphs and tragedies, of great leaders who rose to the occasion and flawed individuals who struggled to meet the demands of the office.
It's a testament to the enduring power of democracy, that despite our differences, despite our flaws, we continue to come together every 4 years to choose our leader. And it's a reminder that the presidency, like our nation itself, is a work in progress, constantly evolving, constantly being shaped by the choices we make and the challenges we face.
So much to ponder. It makes you wonder what future presidents will face and how they'll be remembered in the grand narrative of American history. It's a story that's still being written, and we, the people, all have a role to play in shaping the next chapter. Until next time, keep those thinking caps on.